what is it about teaching that you like? It's hard to
Well,
put down.
especially human rights, I think it's so important that law students really get to understand what it means. Kasi kung pati sila hindi nila maunawaan, no, lalo nang tayo magkakaproblema niyan.
Is there a difference with how, young people today and, 2 or 3 decades back appreciate it?
I think the environment kasi was so different eh. After EDSA, of course, before EDSA, ang sama-sama ng tingin ng pamahalaan, and I think that also reflected on ordinary people pagdating sa human rights. After EDSA, people looked up to human rights defenders. Doon talaga naging popular yung maging human rights defender ka. Then we went full circle because in 2016, mismo yung Pangulo, nilalait niya ang human rights at talagang minamaliit niya yung mga human rights defenders. And that's the environment that we have to operate in today.
That's for the content. What about on teaching itself? I mean, what has changed in terms of how you teach, how you should teach? Let's say from our generation to the social media generation now.
Well, I can't speak for other law professors. We each have our own approach to the subject. But my teaching of human rights has really evolved from before. Because even my own understanding of human rights and why it's so important has had to go through all of this fake news that was being spread, especially by the previous administration. So internally, I had to grapple with that. Yung sinasabi nila na, hindi naman importante ang human rights. It's human life that's important. Yung mga human rights defender na, puro criminal lang naman ang dinidepensahan ninyo. Of course, it was very clear to me na that's not the real reason. So I had to really think about why are they so het up about attacking human rights?
Or at least cynical.
No, it's very,
Attack talaga.
it's really a concerted effort, not only to go after human rights defenders, but to destroy the very concept of human rights and to convince people that that's nothing, it doesn't mean anything in your life. And that's when I realized that human rights means 3 things that many people in power, I'm not saying all, but a lot of people in power don't want. When you accept the concept of human rights, you have to accept that there has to be accountability. Because human rights doesn't mean anything kung yung mga nag-violate, walang pananagutan. That's one. And many people in power don't want accountability. When you accept human rights as a concept, you empower ordinary people. Pag kinilala ko yung karapatan ng isang mangingisda, manggagawa, katutubo, binibigyan natin siya ng lakas, di ba, ng kapangyarihan. Ayaw din nila yon. They want the power all to themselves. And when you accept human rights, you're talking about equality for everyone. Kahit mahirap ka, kahit wala kang ari-arian, you still deserve respect under the law. Those are the 3 things that they don't want. They don't want accountability. They don't want empowerment of ordinary people. They don't want equality. And that's when I realized, I said, that's the real reason why they are attacking human rights so vehemently. Talagang gusto nilang pisilin hanggang mawala na yung konsepto. Because ayaw nila niyan. But for us, if we really want a just society, that's exactly what we need. Kaya para sa akin, the harder they attack, the stronger we have to push back. And I've really devoted a lot of effort to explaining to people what I just told you. Kasi, and when I speak about it, I tell them, alam po ninyo, yung mga mayayaman, hindi naman kanila kailangan ng human rights. Yung mga malalaking tao, hindi nila kailangan ng human rights. Makita lang natin mga bodyguard niyan, mga malalaking kotse at bahay, irerespeto na yan. Ang talagang nangangailangan ng human rights ay yung ordinaryong mamamayan, yung palaging inaapakan, yung palaging inaabuso, yung palaging dehado. Without human rights, that concept if you're born poor, you will remain poor
But
for the
wasn't that
rest of your
always,
life.
but wasn't that always the challenge, and wasn't that always, I mean, pagka binanggit mo yung mga, I mean, them, as you said, yung mga may nasa kapangyarihan, at saka merong mga interest na pinoprotektahan, they've always existed. And they were there even during our times, even before us, merong mga makapangyarihan. Pero may nagbago ba doon sa side naman ng audience, no? Ng mamamayan? May nagbago ba? Or in other words, mas tumatalab ba yung atake sa human rights, gaya ng sabi nyo, sa henerasyon ngayon compared dun sa mga nakaunang...
Tingin ko may nagbago on both sides. Kasi yung mga nasa kabilang side, sabihin na lang natin, dati hindi naman ganun katindi yung pag-aatake nila mismo sa human
may tumindi
rights.
talaga. May tumindi
Oo.
talaga.
At hindi lang sa traditional media, lalo pa sa social media. On the other hand, yung audience, sabihin na lang natin, o yung ordinaryong mamamayan, because of all the fake news being spread, because of they kept being pounded and pounded na huwag kayo maniwala dyan, hindi wala namang halagang human rights, it became more challenging for us to explain. And the minute you talk about human rights in the abstract, mawawala agad ang audience mo.
So how do you explain it not in the abstract? How do you make it more
I talk about
tangible?
real people and real cases and stories that people understand happen to them every day. There's no other way really to discuss it.
Is that why you're on TikTok?
Yeah, actually, you know, yung social media presence ko all started during the pandemic. Kasi ang dami namin natanggap sa FB page ko noon ng puro mga legal questions to the point where umaabot na sa thousands of questions. So I got, since many lawyers weren't doing anything at that time, I got 5 young lawyers. And I said, sagutin natin yung lahat ng tanong nila. Do you know that when we opened the free legal help desk, the first 7 months alone, we received almost 20,000 questions.
Questions, okay.
And we strove to answer, pretty much nasagot namin siguro 90 to 95%. Ang ginawa namin, kasi napansin namin na paulit-ulit ang tanong. For example, birth certificate, such a common question. Paano ko ba maayos yung mali sa birth certificate ko? So many people did not know that they didn't need a lawyer, they didn't need to go to court to correct their birth certificate. I'm not all situations, pero marami ng sitwasyon na pwede na yun eh.
Mali spelling or mali
Yun. And it's only when we explain to them, pumunta lang po kayo sa website ng civil registrar, download nyo yung forms, hindi na nyo kailangan ng abogado. Kung may tanong kayo, punta lang kayo sa LCR, sa local civil registrar, tutulungan kayo niyan. Maayos nyo na yung problema nyo. And that's when it came to us that it's not just lawyers that ordinary people don't have access to. It's just basic legal information, which I found out can be very empowering. Kasi pag napalitan nila halimbawa yung birth certificate, ako na mismo ang gumawa niyan. And that's when they realize there are things I can do even as an ordinary citizen. I don't need a lawyer or anyone else to help me do it.
But give me other examples na linalapit sa inyo na actually, even now, people are watching. What are some examples of...
Yung isa na talagang nag-viral, yung paano kung meron property line, may puno dyan sa may bandang property line, na mangga, halimbawa, nahulog ngayon yung mangga sa kabilang property. Sino ngayon ang may-ari niyan? Paano kung nasa puno pa, tas pinitas ng kapitbahay mo? Yung mga ganun, ang bilis na nag-viral yon. If you're wondering what the answer is, while it's on the tree, it belongs to the property owner where the tree is.
Pero kung malaglag...
Pero pag mahulog na,
fair game.
pwede nang kunin.
But what have you learned about TikTok itself?
Well,
or social media in general?
That you cannot use the same way of presenting the same idea with different social media platforms.
Bawat platform, iba ang strategy.
For example, yung ilalabas mo sa YouTube ay kahit na pareho ang content mo, kailangan iba ang presentation, even yung length compared sa TikTok.
Okay.
ganon.
So we're not just talking about dito horizontal, dito vertical, dito mas mahaba, dito mas maiksi. But at the same time, you're saying it's the same content.
Yes,
Give me an example.
even the language and even yung how their attention can be grabbed. Because the team that helps me, of course, my son Pepe
Is a filmmaker.
puro mga young people yan. So alam nila yung nauuso. Ito sa TikTok, trending to, ganyan. So maggumawa tayo ng something on legal, pero isingit natin yung whatever it is, no? Could be a hand gesture or a quick dance or something. Kung ano man yon. So ako naman, I've learned to just go with the flow. Kung ganun yung usapan namin, sige, let's do it, you know.
And so you have to take it one at a time, like ito naman ang YouTube take natin pagkatapos ito ganun isa-isa.
Yeah.
So it's not just taking one long and then repurposing.
You can't.
You can't.
So I've gotten used
Did
to
you
it.
Did you have to embrace that? Did you have to swallow that?
Yeah. In the beginning, I have to admit, it was very difficult, especially for a guy of my generation. But after a while, I learned to, okay, sige, okay na sakyan to. And it's been, nowadays, I'm very, very flexible.
I ask a lot of my guests this. On the other side of social media, you as a social media user, what does your algorithm feed you? It's always a two-parter. One is, what does your algorithm feed you that makes you say, okay, naintindihan ko kung bakit sa akin yan, di ba? You probably get chiropractors and treatments for the back or whatever.
Hindi
diba?
naman.
But that's not, di ba?
Yeah.
What does your algorithm feed you that makes sense to you? And then what are some things that your algorithm feeds you that surprised you and that actually showed you na, I didn't realize I had this side in me?
Okay, well, I get a lot. I love true crime, yung mga forensic type of things, both documentary and fictionalized. So I get a lot of that. I love to play badminton, so I do watch videos sometime, and even pool, billiards. I don't play anymore, pero mahilig lang ako manood. So, yun, lumalabas
So, a lot of Efren Bata, the greatest of all time.
Yes, exactly. And yung mga hindi ko naman magets, minsan I get stuff like for people my age about medicines, treatment. But even at my age, I'm not on maintenance. I don't take any of that.
At all?
Not at all. I'm not.
Parang napapahiya naman ako sa inyo. Really? Not for BP, not for sugar?
Nothing. So, I get surprised sometimes na lumalabas yun sa feed ko. Sabi ko, wala naman akong gamot na binibili o iniinom. I take sometimes yung mga organic, herbal stuff, but I don't take any maintenance medication.
Is that a Diokno thing? Or?
No, actually, I think I'm lucky. Among my siblings, I'm probably the one who doesn't take any kind of maintenance medication.
But you have vices.
Oh,
I mean, do you drink? Did you ever smoke?
I used to smoke a lot.
You eat?
Yes.
You enjoy eating?
I was before.
Are you a healthy eater?
Ganito yun eh. When I started smoking as a teenager because both my parents smoked and halos lahat ng mga kapatid ko noon were also smokers. I only stopped around 2015 after more than 3 decades of smoking. When I stopped smoking, I got fat. Kasi ang sarap kumain eh. And I used to eat a lot of rice. So the first thing I cut out of my diet was rice. Then I really got into working out. Dati pa naman, mahilig na ako mag-workout and play badminton and all. But I became more regular at that time. Then lately, since the pandemic, I practice IF, intermittent fasting. And for me, other people it maybe doesn't work, but it's been very helpful for me. And I have a daily routine. If I don't play badminton, I work out at home. If I don't do it, minsan pa nga, nagigilty ako hinahanap ng katawan ko eh. So, yun.
Okay, so that explains it. I mean, the exercise. I mean, you've always been a physically active person
Since
always?
high school, as a child, I was obese. So when I was like grade 5, grade 6, I started playing basketball, started learning how to watch my diet and all that. But it took me a lot of years to deal with my weight issues. Then in high school, I played basketball. I was actually in the second tier team, not the NCAA, pero yung second level na basketball team sa Lasal. And then in college, hindi na ako naglaro except just with friends. We would play regularly. I got into badminton siguro early 90s na, late 80s, early 90s.
Oh, okay. So not even fatty liver, not even high
No,
blood
so far,
sugar.
knock on wood, all my tests have been
Sige.
normal.
Balikan ko lang. One last question and then we'll move on to another. Still on the algorithm. So, ito yung mga, sabi nyo nga, meron mga bagay hindi nyo maintindihan. But what does your algorithm feed you? Or what has it fed you that didn't make sense at the start, but actually actually made you learn something about yourself? Has your algorithm actually taught you something that you didn't realize?
Oh, well,
Parang,
I don't know how they figured it out, but I also get a lot of stuff on psychology, which is really an interest of mine. But when I research psychology, kasi hindi naman ako gumagamit ng FB eh. I, I go to the Google Scholarly, and all of that. It has to do also with my practice as a lawyer. May trial lawyer ka, so kailangan naintindihan mo rin yung psychology ng witness, ganyan. But ang dami lumalabas, which I am interested in. So pag nakikita ko ba, okay ito thank you. At least I get something worthwhile to read from FB.
Ginest ko, of course, Pepe, your son, a few episodes back. He's an Jose also. I asked him, sabi niya, marami palang Jose sa angkan, di ba? How was that? I mean, not just Jose Diokno, but a Diokno in general. How was that growing up as a Diokno? Is that a burden? Does that predestine your direction in life? I mean, for example, what did you really want to be? It's almost inevitable, of course, that people now know you as a lawyer and a human rights lawyer, now in politics. But what did you really want to be?
Well, first, mas mabigat pa siguro kay Pepe
Oo,
because
Pepe.
he was named after Jose, my father, and then Lorenzo after Katani Tanyada. So I'm sure the pressure on him, especially to follow that path, must have been tremendous. And I'm very happy that he chose his own path. Ako naman, I was really influenced by what happened to my dad during martial law. It was when he was arrested in 1972. I was only 11 years old, but I cannot forget that evening because that's really emblazoned in my memory. And all those days when we had to visit him in jail, after having seen him as a younger child be a senator and prominent lawyer, really shaped how I looked at reality. When he was released in 1974, I was 13 years old. And I had already decided, I'm going to be a lawyer like my father. And every time, even the people who would come to our house changed. When I was younger, ang pupunta sa bahay, mga politiko, naka-Mercedes-Benz, well-dressed and all that. When he was released in 1974, ang pupunta sa bahay, mga naka-tsinelas, mga pare, mga madre, manggagawa, aktivista, mga estudyante. And that's when I learned what really was happening in the country. And naalala ko pa yun, pag nakikita ko magbibihis siya to go to military court pa noong time na yon, I would always ask him, can I go with you? And I never got bored. Because the lawyers defending those people charged in the military court with rebellion, subversion, etc., they were some of the best lawyers our country has ever produced. So hindi ako na-bore talaga. Talagang I was fascinated by what was happening in court.
And you could follow it as a young teenager.
Yeah, I could follow it. Every year after that, every summer I worked in my dad's office, which was in our house. So, nung una, ang binibigay niyang trabaho sa akin, mga ano lang, yun na yung
Mimyo.
simple stuff, legwork. I recall one time he told me, go to the Manila City Jail, look for this detainee, tell him about this hearing, and at the same time, get a record from the jail office. Marami na akong napuntahan na political prisoner detention centers by that time, but I had never been to a common city jail. So I just took a jeep, got lost, found my way to the jail. Pagpasok ko doon sa jail, tinatakan ako ng jail guard. Yun na yung tatak na visitor ka. Sabi, boy, pag mawala yung tatak mo, hindi ka na makakalabas dito. Summer yun, ang init. Every few minutes, naku, nawawala na yung tatak ko. But yeah, it was in the beginning things like that. Later, he would make me read cases and then court transcripts of his hearings. When he would prepare witnesses, I would be there. I would watch him. And when he would go to court, of course, every chance I got, I would go with him. So I learned more, I think, from him than I did in law school in terms of the actual practice of law.
Yeah. I mean, your introduction to the court was watching the trials of your father as a political prisoner. So I imagine for a young person, that's what you imagine what, people getting arrested was. And for that matter, detention, as you said, di ba, parang iba yung makita mo sa Bonifacio o ano yung tatay mo. And then to go to city jail. I mean, talk to that for a while. When you then go into city jail, and these are no longer prisoners of conscience, these are no longer political prisoners. Kaya nga nasabi niyo, iba to dun sa nakikinig ka sa trial and watching the lawyers. And now you're seeing people who are in prison, who are in jail for many other reasons, including very petty reasons.
Yeah.
How different are those two worlds?
They're two completely different environments. Even within the Bilibid, the maximum, before, I'm not sure if it's the same situation now after the pandemic. Hiwalay yung mga political prisoners, nasa building 11 sila. All the other those convicted of common crimes were in other buildings. And in the other buildings, ang maraming gangs. Talagang yung mandando doon palagi yung mga gang leader. Doon sa Building 11, na nakakapasok kami as lawyers noon, it was really run like a political prisoner detention center. Meaning that there was tulong-tulong silang lahat. Walang nag-aaway kung may issues, meron silang system for resolving disputes between people who were inside. Sama-sama din yung pagtutulong sa pagluto ng pagkain. Nakagawa sila ng maliit na farm sa likod where they would grow vegetables. So you could see that there was a lot of solidarity within that you didn't really see in the other buildings then. And even, ang laki ng difference din in terms of how jails are congested. Any jail that houses people charged with common crimes is almost sigurado congested yan, even before, lalo na ngayon. Because our congestion rates are some of the highest in the world.
And it's gotten worse?
It has gotten worse.
Palpably, and for you, you've seen it through the decades.
Especially during the war on drugs. Because almost all of those who in jail at that time were because of drugs. And yung ganong kaliliit na gramo ng shabu, halimbawa, yung kaso sa kanila.
Kaya nga, and we've all seen that. But I'm trying to fathom the system because we've been talking about that for a long time. And I'm actually trying to, set aside muna the war on drugs ni Duterte. But over the decades that you've seen it, it's actually gotten worse. I mean, I'm just talking about the congestion.
Yes.
Really?
The congestion rate at I think even up to now is around 400% or somewhere in that range. One of the reasons why cases take so long and people have to stay in jail for so long, hindi ito pinag-uusapan is we have a big problem with vacancy rates, both among our judges and among prosecutors. For many decades, the vacancy rate among judges in the lower courts was 33%. It's one-third. After salaries were increased and compensation packages got better, now it's at 20% more or less. But 20% is still one-fifth of our courts are vacant. Then you have the vacancy rates among prosecutors. It's around 30 to 34%. Again, that's about a third. So, kung hospital ang justice system, kulang ka ng doktor, kulang ka ng nurse, araw-araw may bagong pasyenteng pumapasok, how can you dispense justice swiftly? And that's why people languish in jail for so long. Because if you have a judge who's handling 2 or 3 branches, 2-3 sala hawak niya, how can you expect that judge to act quickly on each and every case? Talaga matatagalan siya. At hindi rin niya kasalanan yun dahil dapat isang sala lang sila.
You're trying to make it to Congress now, sa party list. What's one simple solution for that?
Well, number one, I think we have to make sure that the process of appointment in the judiciary and in the prosecution is decentralized or delegated and depoliticized. Because
Leila de Lima said the same thing in my previous episode.
once the president has to appoint thousands upon thousands of people into government, including all judges and all prosecutors. So you can imagine the amount of papers that reach Malacanang, na patong-patong yan. It has gotten to the point when I was General Counsel of the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee way back in 2001. Lawyers from the provinces would come to me and say, tulungan mo naman ako ma-appoint. Sabi ko, bakit? Kailangan ko ng backer. Sabi ko, ano lang naman ako dito counsel lang ako ng Blue Ribbon. Hindi, marami kang kilalang mga senador. Kung wala akong backer ng mga politiko, hindi gagalaw yung papeles ko.
And that was the truth.
And that is the same situation we have today where the perception at least of many lawyers is I will not get appointed unless I have a political
That's my question. I mean, because you really inserted that word in there. That's the perception. But is it accurate? Is it actually
I cannot
true?
say with personal knowledge. I've heard a lot of stories about how you have to go through this person or that person in this administration if you want your papers to move. But personally, I cannot say, I'm not privy to that, which is why I cannot...
But do you share the perception?
Oh, of course, yes, I do. It's very clear to me that the system must be depoliticized.
Yeah, but that I guess solves it on the independence side and the integrity, but it doesn't solve the math.
Yeah. The issues naman sa vacancy is I think we have to offer much better packages to our would-be judges, especially in terms of the security that they can be given once they sit. Kasi yun yung isang malaking pangamba ng mga abogado na mga judge, typical yan na makakaroon ng mga death threat yan, etc. Paano naman yung pamilya ko? And the government, we've had so many lawyers and judges killed since 2016. The figure is, I think, somewhere late 60s or more, even 70 plus already. And that must be addressed by the government if we are to attract more and better judges.
You think this ICC investigation on Duterte is going to go anywhere?
I think so. In terms of how the Office of the Prosecutor is working in the International Criminal Court, mukha naman they're really intent on moving this forward. Now, what everyone is waiting for is whether they will apply for actual warrants of arrest and whether those will be issued, and what will be the response of our government if and when those warrants are issued.
But when government responds, and let's say government responds as constructively as one can wish for, is that a victory for the justice system, or is that just another chapter in the politics of the Philippines?
It's a victory for the victims of the war on drugs. For the justice system itself, it's a reflection that our justice system is not strong enough that we can prosecute the big, powerful people in our country because the ICC operates on that principle of complementarity. Now, the victims of the war on drugs have been really looking for justice for a long time, but many of them are really, really scared to pursue cases here, understandably. Because up to now, those who were responsible for the killings of their relatives are still in uniform. Many of them are, or otherwise still in power. So it's but natural that they will be afraid to pursue cases here, especially if you're going to file a case against a former president or a senator of the republic.
But how do you, for the stewards and the stakeholders sa justice system, how should they frame it? Or is there no way around that dilemma? That on the one hand, if we cooperate and if we allow the ICC to come in here and we all know to what ends it's serving, but how do they frame it in a way that does not basically admit that because we can't do it?
Yun ang dilemma ng government ngayon which is why I think they've been moving back and forth between saying they'll cooperate or they won't cooperate with the ICC.
Okay. It's because of a real dilemma, not because they're playing politics?
It's probably both.
Okay. Because speaking of that, I wanted to ask, and this is the same question I asked Senator De Lima, her getting released, for example. And I asked her, did you ever talk to President Marcos? He said, other than the hostage situation, we never talked. And I guess it also goes to her point that she was happy to be able to say, no, we let the system work and we put our faith in the system. But at the end of the day, di ba, as a Filipino, you're also, of course, I'm happy for Senator De Lima, but I'm also wondering, was it the system that released her? Was it justice was it the long arc of justice that eventually allowed her to be free? Or is it, at the end of the day, hindi, politika rin yung nanaig dyan eh. Diba? It was politics that sent you to prison unjustly. And as happy as I am for you, it's still, at the end of the day, I can't get that off my mind that it's still politics that allows her to get out.
You know, one institution, one concept of our way of government that really hasn't received much attention, but I think which is at the heart of what happened to Senator Laila, is the independence of the judiciary. For our way of government to work, judges must be independent of whoever sits in power. But sad to say, especially in the case of Senator Laila, that was not the case. And that's one of the reasons why she stayed in prison for so long. Because during the administration of former President Duterte, she wasn't getting anywhere in terms of her fight for justice. It was only after that some space opened up that really allowed her to, for especially her witnesses to come forward and say, we were intimidated, we were coerced. I don't think they would be able to say that that openly if it was still the previous administration. And that's one thing that saddens me because we have been neglecting the justice system for decades, and especially that issue of independence of the judiciary, which was first destroyed by the Marcos dictatorship during martial law.
I mean, that's a good point. I mean, you talk about the independence and you frame it as neglect because, and you're right, diba? Parang, I think people will recognize that, but it's never, I mean, for me personally, it hasn't been put that way. That it's really, at the end of the day, beyond independence or lack thereof, it's neglect. Because you cannot say that the two other branches of government have ever been neglected.
Yes, that's so true. Even in terms of budget alone, you look at how much is given to the judiciary, it doesn't even reach 2%. Minsan 1.2, 1-point-something%
of the budget
nabibigay ng national budget sa judiciary.
Is there an international standard for that?
That's a good question. I'm not aware of any specific number, but I'm pretty sure that 1% is way too small.
Oh, but in the context kasi of all the other things, di ba? Whatever percentage goes to education, whatever percentage goes to our public health system, I think everything is
Yes,
small.
that's true.
Okay. What's harder, you think? Um, Achieving some indicators of justice, particularly on the war on drugs, um, extending all the way up to Duterte, or winning a seat in the Senate, not in the House of Representatives?
Well, that's like comparing apples and oranges.
No, pero
Parehong,
I'm asking in the context of your particular journey and your particular experiences.
well, if you were to ask me if the possibility of holding the former president accountable within the Philippines, I think that would even be harder than winning a Senate seat. But both are extremely difficult challenges.
And you're saying, I mean, dun sa ano, you said within the Philippines, within our jurisdiction. So you're saying even that is more difficult than having something achieved at the level of the ICC?
The ICC, the difference for me between a trial at the ICC and a trial in the Philippines is that a trial at the ICC would be removed entirely from politics, from Philippine politics. The judges there would be, I think, relatively at least immune from any kind of influence from the Philippines. They will not be Philippine judges, so that any kind of attempts to co-opt them, to intimidate them, or even to buy them off, I think will not work. And the tradition really within the ICC has been to decide cases on the merits, which is not the same situation we have in the Philippines. In the first place, you talk to any veteran lawyers, when they talk about cases, they'll ask, sino ang mga justice involved? Sino nag-appoint dyan? Immediately, that indicates something about how their decisions will be, which goes back to the issue of judicial independence. And then you go to so many factors that can affect the, judges are all, in our country, are political animals. When they see that public opinion, for example, is strongly going one way, it's very, very difficult for them to remain independent. And that can happen so easily when you prosecute a powerful person in our country.
Okay. But gusto kong balikan yung Senado because it's still, maybe not winning a Senate seat. I guess the larger question there is, which is harder, achieving some kind of justice here or reforming the political system? I ask also, not without some irony, I asked the same thing with Senator Leila de Lima. Diba? You're both running in the party list system now. In a way, you're running, exploiting the same dysfunction that's now been institutionalized in the party list system. Diba? The Liberal Party enters a party list because now the door is wide open. How do you reform the political system? And how much more difficult is that than all the campaigns for justice that you still have not achieved?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't say that we are exploiting the present party list system. I think the better term is to say we are trying to bring it back to its real purpose, which was really to allow a voice for the sectors that really
So you
don't
get
have a
in
voice.
and you try to reform from within. That's the argument.
Yes.
Okay.
But in terms of reforming our system of the electoral process, we have to find a way to level the playing field. It's pretty obvious that members of political dynasties and candidates who have a big war chest have a great, tremendous advantage over progressive candidates who cannot raise enough funds to go on TV and to have TV ads and all of that. Ang laki-laki ng disparity. And that has to change. If we really want to strengthen our democracy, kailangan talaga magbago yan.
But this much, I guess, it's fair to say, for everything that people can say about the party list system right now, they are having a moment right now, di ba? The party list representatives are in fact having a moment. They are, by every indicator, they're dominating the congressional hearings. umaangat yung profile ng mga individuals na, galing pala nito, mas magaling pa to dun sa mga congressman ng mga distrito and so on. What does that say? I mean, and what do you look forward to if you make it as a representative of the Akbayan party list? What do you look forward to as someone who may now belong to the party list caucus?
I think it provides a great opportunity, not only to push progressive legislation, but also as well to build a progressive bloc within the House of Representatives, which can be comprised of members of the party lists. You know, yung problema kasi sa traditional representatives sa House ay nakatali sila sa distrito nila eh. They have so many interests that they have to protect within their district. And that provides a limiting factor as well in terms of how they can behave in hearings and other, and even in terms of proposed legislation, which party lists are not bound by.
Yeah.
So, mas marami tingin ko ang opening at opportunity kung party list ka.
But now people look at the party list system now. I mean, just to bring back a little bit of the cynicism as well as the observation of people of parties. On the one hand, itong mga traditional congressman at ngiti natin, as we always say, the landed elite, diyan talaga nag-umpisa yung kanilang poder. And that's why it's hard for them to go against, you know, these long-standing, centuries-old vested interests nila. On the other hand, you look at the party list system now, and it's, I don't know, I haven't looked at the numbers, but the impression certainly of people is that's a club of very, very rich people. Yeah, that's a club of very, very rich people. And maybe you're not one of those. Maybe Senator De Lima is not one of those, but certainly the majority of the party list caucus, let's call them that right now, are also in people's minds and their perception, not unfairly, is ultimately also, yeah, they're not representing districts, but they are representing vested interests, economic interests, and their own economic interests.
Yes, yes.
In the same way that we wonder, how can political dynasties vote for an anti-dynasty bill? How can the party list system really go back to saying, no, let's bring this back to giving this to the marginalized sectors?
That is a big concern. And if you add the fact that there are a number of political dynasties that have created their own party list so that they can field their own family members there, lalo pang nagiging malaking problema yan. I recall even the COMELEC chair has made some comments about the need to find legislation that will bring the party list system back to its original objective. And that has to be done. Maganda yung konsepto, pero ngayon may nakitang butas yung mga nandun sa poder at ginagamit nila.
Yeah, so how do you convince them, or how will the public be convinced that these are the same people who will close the back door through which they all stampeded?
Well, 2025 will be very interesting because if enough progressive representatives from party lists get elected, that can provide a pretty solid block that can probably make some better legislation in terms of promoting the interests of the people. So that's something I'm looking forward to, you know, if I'm fortunate enough to get the seat.
Balikan ko ulit yung isang tanong. We didn't quite get there. You talked about, in a way, it was inevitable. You were exposed to the law. You were exposed to human rights because of your father. Fortunately for you, you actually enjoyed it. So there's no such question as in an alternate universe, Chel Diokno would have been something else.
Well, I've been asked that question a number of times, and when I thought about it, sabi ko, I would probably have been a writer if I did not pursue this this trajectory.
As in a journalist, fiction.
A lot of people don't know that I was a fellow of the Creative Writing Center at UP in my college days. In fact, I still have the certificate that was signed by no less than Franz Arceliana and Nick Joaquin. So that was one of the things I was very interested in my younger days.
And in your younger days, not anymore.
I still have a dream of writing a novel sometime, but of course, I don't know if I have the time to do that.
But is it in fact unfinished somewhere? Did you ever start it?
I've taken a stab at some stories, but never really gotten to finish any that I'm happy with.
Okay. What are you learning now? I mean, now that what's your biggest learning from all your past attempts at politics? Past elections where you didn't quite make it. Now you're in TikTok, as we said. What are you learning about just the realities, the pragmatism of politics?
Well, you know, I've learned so much in the last 6 or 7 years. Stuff that I never thought I would encounter. And it's from the small things to the big things. I've been fortunate that I've had the opportunity to work alongside people like Senator Kiko Pangilinan, Sen Risa Ontiveros, and Senator Bamakino, among many others. And from them, I've picked up a lot about how you, for example, deal with local government officials, how you even have to, how to deal with the daily, routine of having to go out and speak. Sometimes you have 5 or 6 different speaking engagements in one day that involve different crowds, different language that you have to be ready for. And even dealing with the media. These are things that, although I did have some interaction as a lawyer and educator before, syempre iba yung nangangampanya ka.
Your we've been talking about a lot of your campaigns and efforts and passion for justice. We're talking about your campaign now to not only win but to reform Philippine politics. When was the last time you gave up on anything?
I don't know. There were cases I had which really depressed me because of their outcome, to the point that sometimes even my own clients would have to console me rather than the opposite, that I would be consoling my clients. And there were times when I was really down. But for some reason or other, I just get up and continue. A lot of it, I think, has to do with my kids and the younger generation of Filipinos, because I see them and I'm like, I will never allow, at least for as long as I'm alive, that they will have to live in a country where there's no freedom, where their movements are controlled, where they cannot express themselves without fear of being chased by some person or other. Hindi ako papayag doon. And I will do everything I can to prevent that from happening.
I mean, last question na lang. I only have 1 hour for this show, and I don't intend it to be so negative, although I really do want to ask it. I mean, in the context of what you said, do you not look at it as a series and a lifelong series of losses and disappointments and reversals? How do you frame it in your mind? You talk about, sige, this has to be for my kids. But I think you can empathize with every Filipino. Na sunod-sunod na dagok, sunod-sunod na disappointment, napapahiya, akala natin ito na. And then so many moments in our history na, oh no, it's either bumalik sa dati or it just feels like we're just running in.
Well, let me tell you a story, something that happened to me. When my father was jailed in Fort Bonifacio, around the 2nd year, after a year of his detention, the restrictions loosened a little bit, and we were allowed to visit him for the entire day every Sunday. Dati kasi weekdays lang for 1 hour, 2 hours. He was in a cell okay, if this was his cell, talagang puro high walls yan, may tower. And when we would visit him, we would only be allowed to stay in that small area. There was a very tiny garden in front of his cell. After a few weeks of our visiting, he realized that behind him, behind his cell, there was a big area that was all cogon grass, matataas na talahib. Nagpaalam siya, sabi niya, pag linggo, pwede ba namin i-clear? Mga anak ko at ako, i-clear namin yan. Gusto ko magtanim ng halaman, mga puno. And the military agreed. So every Sunday, my brothers and I, with my father, we would clear a portion of that field. And eventually, we got to clear it entirely. And that's where we would picnic during the afternoon, lay out our banigs, etc. And that's where he began to plant trees, and he loved roses. So when he was released, medyo maliliit pa yung mga halaman doon. And when he left that place, we all forgot about it. As in, it never entered into my consciousness again. Fast forward to around 1990. I was already a new lawyer at that time, and in Flag, we had the client, sabi sa amin ng pamilya, nandun po siya sa Fort Bonifacio. Sabi ko, sige, dadalawin ko. I go to the place and I say, dito nakakulong ang daddy nun. They bring me to where he's being held. I say, this is the cell where my father was kept. So when he came out, I told him, alam mo ba kung sino nakulong dyan? Tatay ko yung nakakulong dyan dati. So we spoke, and I had still forgotten about the garden at the back. As I was leaving, kasi may steel door yun na nakakandado yan to get to the backside. So I was leaving, I saw it, and all the memories came flooding back of how everything we had done. So nagpaalam ako sa sundalo, sabi ko, sir, pwede niyo bang buksan yung pinto? Gusto ko lang makita kung nandun pa yung garden na kami nagtanim nung una. When he opened it, the trees that were so tiny before were huge. And the garden was a lush garden.
Anong puno to?
Iba-iba eh. I don't even recall anymore what kinds of trees they were. And when I left that place, I realized that even in the darkest places, that detention center, talagang yung sense mo doon, yung feeling mo madilim, depressing, puro mga detainee yung nakakulong doon, series of prisoners. And sabi ko, even in the darkest places, hope can rise. And I really treasure that experience, because for me, it's a reflection as well of how our country can grow. That even if we go through these trying times, we can really make a better Philippines.
Ang ganda. Atty. Chel Diokno po. Hindi ko na pinakilala dahil alam nyo namang lahat. So, but as you know, I only have 1 hour for this show. Maraming salamat po. Meron pa kaming konting pag-uusapan dito. I have this privilege, but you will have to leave us. Maraming salamat po for joining us. This is Roundtable. Hanapin nyo lang po. Ipopost din namin to sa YouTube. But papalabas natin to every Saturday. Lumalabas ang Roundtable sa One News, single channels 8 or 250 kung gusto nyo ng HD. Sa YouTube, hanapin nyo lang po ang One News at saka Long Conversation at saka Roundtable. And of course, Atty. Chel Diokno, you'll see this particular episode, but do check out our other episodes as well. Muli po ako si Roby Alampay. Maraming salamat for joining us today lang po kami dito.